Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bassam Haddad. I am the founding director of the Middle East and Islamic Studies program and also the co-founder of MESPI, Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative, which brings you this event. It is also co-sponsored by the Middle East and Islamic Studies program and the Shar School at George Mason University. I am pleased to present this event, which in so many ways has been long coming. It also is being held after a roundtable was published. I will be introducing our awesome moderator, Jonathan Adler, who will himself be moderating the event and will also be introducing our lovely speakers. So let me start by saying that the the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative, too many Middle Easts. The Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative had its start perhaps well over a decade ago, and has been able to present, furnish various forms of resources for educators, researchers, students, journalists, and everyone who wishes to visit our site, mespi.org, for any insights. We also have been able to bring together a large area of scholars to present their work, and now we are happy to start this Publishers Roundtable, Trends in Publishing on the Middle East, as our first panel, and there will be a lot more to come. Let me stop here and introduce Jonathan Adler, who is a senior researcher at the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative, and also a coordinator for a couple of the modules that we have, including engaging books. Jonathan, I will let you take it from here, and I will disappear into the background.
Sounds good. Thanks, Bassam. And welcome to everybody joining us live on YouTube. So as Bassam mentioned, my name is Jonathan Adler. I'm a researcher and editor here at MESPI, the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative, and also a graduate student at the Kevorkian Center for Near Eastern Studies at NYU. And I'm very excited to host this first edition of the Publishers Roundtable. Over the past few years, I've been editing, as Bassam mentioned, the Engaging Books project at MESPI, where we've been able to feature many individual academic and trade publishers, including the ones we have featured here today, to highlight recent publication trends in Middle East studies and new titles. But this is actually the first time that we've been able to bring an international group of publishers together to discuss this topic. I'm particularly happy. I think this is a particularly timely event now, given the impact of the COVID pandemic on the publishing industry, the rise of digital production, as well as what we're seeing here in the US in terms of changes in sources for funding in Middle East studies, as well as geopolitical shifts that have begun and will continue to impact the field. And again, as Bassam mentioned, so we published the first part of this roundtable last month in written format, which is available online on Jadaliya and MESPI. And I'm really excited to expand on that conversation here today. So with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our stellar panel of participants on the roundtable today. So first we have Elizabeth Briggs, who's the editorial director at Saqi Books in London. And we also here have Nadia Naqib, who's the senior acquisitions editor at American University in Cairo Press in Cairo, Egypt. We were also hoping to have Hope LeGro from Georgetown University Press in DC, but I think she's out sick today, but you can see her contribution to this roundtable in the written version, which again is published on Jadaliya. So again, thank you both for being here. And I just wanted to start to allow you to sort of introduce yourselves more fully. So if you could give a brief introduction to your press, as well as your history with the organization and some of the work you do in your current role at the press. So Elizabeth, we'll start with you.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Thanks for the introduction. Hi everyone, thanks for having me as well. So Saqi is based in London, as Jonathan said. So coming from a slightly different perspective to some of the other presses in the original piece in Jadaliya, we're also a trade press. So we occupy quite an interesting space because we straddle the trade and academic spheres. Our history goes back to, we were founded in 1983, but we were founded as a publishing house, interestingly, out of Europe's first Arabic language bookshop, which sadly closed at the end of December, but had been a hub for the Arab diaspora for the past 50 years. So originally a bookshop selling Arabic language books, until an increasing number of readers were coming in and looking for books in the English language about the Middle East, North Africa, Arab worlds, and Islamic worlds. And that was really where the idea for the publishing house was born, because there was a desert of books about the region being produced in English at the time. We've evolved since then. We also publish books that are not exclusively about the Middle East and North Africa. I'll get onto a little bit later as perhaps an interesting point of comparison. We still remain true to our original mission, which is to publish books primarily that reflect a progressive attitude in their treatment of the urgent issues facing the Middle East and the Muslim world. We've published numerous pioneering feminists, from Nawal al-Saadawi, the late Nawal al-Saadawi in Egypt, to last year we published Malika Mustadraf, Moroccan pioneer, and Fatima Manisi, just kind of to name a few. And we publish widely across the region, and not just in translation from Arabic either. We publish in translation also from Turkish, Kurdish, and other languages in the region, as well as books that have been authored initially in English. Many of our books are prize winners or by prize winning writers. We published the short story collection The Quarter by Naqib Mahfouz, so the only Nobel laureate in literature writing in Arabic, and a broad span of books: fiction, non-fiction, poetry. We publish some bilingual collections as well, but also photography, cookery, gift, and humour. I am editorial director, as Jonathan said. I also manage rights at Saqi, and my history with Saqi dates back 6 years, with a short hiatus in the middle. So I will do my best to answer your questions about work from a variety of perspectives and different departments, including marketing and sales.
Perfect. Thank you, Elizabeth. And I'll be sure not to go back to ask about the details of Saqi in 1980. I'll pass it over to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, about AUC Press. AUC Press was founded in 1960. It initially started as a division of AUC, and it initially started as just publishing a kind of handful of books coming out of AUC itself. But over time it evolved. It's much larger now. We have a backlist of about 800 books, and we publish between 40 and 50 titles a year. And actually, quite similar to Saqi, we have quite a range. We publish in quite a range of formats and genres. So we publish scholarly monographs, Arabic language learning titles, fiction, especially fiction in translation, guidebooks, general interest books, and Egypt-focused books. Historically, the press has published a great deal of many titles on Egypt. But in the last about 10 to 15 years ago, we made a conscious strategic decision to widen our remit and publish much more widely on the Middle East, on other parts of the region, not just on Egypt. And we are the leading English language publisher in the Middle East. And I mean, very broadly, I would say that our mission is to publish on the region, from the region. So largely we try to reflect a regional perspective, not regional authors, but the viewpoint, the perspective is local. and we now I think we also have widened our distribution channels as well. So we used to print in one region, and now we print in several different regions, and we have worldwide distribution. So the press has evolved quite a lot over the years. I joined the press in 2004 as managing editor. I came from a UK publishing background. And I was in charge at first of overseeing all our books from manuscript to book in hand. And then about 10 years ago, I was promoted to senior acquisitions editor. I've managed several different lists over the years, but at the moment, I handle history, politics, and architecture for the most part. I also handle rights and contracts for AC Press.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nadia. So I'll get right into the questions. And I was hoping to sort of start from the academic side of Middle East publishing. I know you both mentioned, that your publishing houses are not, strictly limited only to academic monographs, but I think, many in our audience, especially other graduate students like me, as well as professors, independent scholars, would sort of be curious to have your perspective and sort of this insider perspective on the academic side of Middle East publishing. So I was hoping if you could talk a little bit about your relationships with academia, whether that's with academic institutions directly, with university libraries, or sort of the role of area studies conferences, such as the Middle East Studies Association conference that we have here in the U.S. And sort of how, for better or for worse, the academic market has shaped publishing on the Middle East. And again, that can be within the past 10 years, or if you want to sort of go back and take a longer view, that's fine as well. So Nadia, I think let's start with you here.
Well, I mean, academics are our lifeblood. They're the cornerstone of everything we do. We need them. We rely on them for expertise, guidance, obviously peer review. We have peer reviewers, but also we have consultants, people who, on an ad hoc basis, know the press, and we can turn to them for advice at any point. So we need them for everything we do. We also, obviously, many of them are our authors, and they may be authors of academic scholarly monographs or more general interest titles as well. In terms of meetings and conferences, obviously MESA is very important to us. We also attend the Arab Council for Social Sciences, WACMES, which should take place 4 years. I think it's late now. So meetings, especially like MESA, are very, very important to us because we gather so much information at those meetings, and there's so many serendipitous meetings as well that take place with authors and other publishers. So we do cultivate our relationships with academic authors and reviewers, and of course Cairo and Egypt are a hub. Many scholars pass through Egypt. They, visiting scholars, they come and give talks or lectures. And there are several institutions in Egypt, research institutes and so on, where we meet scholars and talk to them and find out from them about general trends in publishing and so on. So, I think we do rely very heavily on academics for our work. We couldn't exist without them, really.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Elizabeth, and I'm particularly curious, as you mentioned, to sort of hear your perspective on this. Given that Saqi is a non-academic press, or not a university press, and one of the sort of the most prominent publishers on Middle East studies that's not sort of directly tied to university or originally tied to university.
I'm so glad that we've swapped the order and Nadia's answering first. Thank you for that. It's really great hearing you, Nadia, as well. and the way that you work. Yeah, I would make a real distinction between how we work with academics and how we work with academic institutions. I think the same as with the American University of Cairo Press. Academics are kind of the lifeblood of what we do in so many ways. Yes, a lot of them are our authors. Yes, we check in for peer review for many of them. We also check in for kind of taking the pulse or the temperature on what's going on in the region and in specific fields. An example of that is I recently started the conversation as to whether we should continue to be referring to the Middle East and North Africa as the MENA region or the SWANA region, and hearing feedback on that. In terms of academic institutions themselves, unfortunately, and probably sped along by COVID, there's been a few changes, not for the better, with the ways we've worked. We used to do a series with SOAS in London, which we really loved. Unfortunately, that sort of discontinued about 7 years ago. We'd love to do another series with a university that is on a particular topic, but that hasn't yet come to fruition. We always have a presence at the conferences, but again, we haven't been at BRISMES, so the British Middle East Studies conference, since before COVID. We're a really small team. There's only 4 of us full time, so it's just not always feasible to have someone on the ground, although our books are always there and prominent. Our ties with SOAS are probably the strongest. That's probably the best parallel to draw. But the London Middle East Institute there, unfortunately, the LMEI, closed to some degree, mutated a few years ago. So we are no longer so regularly a presence at SOAS. We do work irregularly with the Middle East Centre at St Anthony's College at Oxford University. But our relationships with different organisations, I wish they were stronger, but in all honesty, they depend a lot on our relationship with the academics or professors at the universities at any one given time.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. I think we all graduate students, other professors, other people affiliated with Jadalia, we always I think find a lot of energy from academic conferences and from going to these the book fairs there, meeting publishers, sort of building these relationships. I think it's been for me particularly working on the Engaging Books project for the past number of years, sort of fruitful to see how these relationships are formed, both between academic individual academics and as you mentioned, Elizabeth, academic institutions and publishers, and how that sort of continues to shape the kind of knowledge that can be produced and published on the region. So I want to turn sort of to a similar note about that I think has particularly impacted academics working in Middle East studies, which is the question of declining institutional support for Middle East studies as a field, and sort of the impact of geopolitical shifts on academic knowledge production. So for example, here in the U.S., we've seen over the past even just year a sharp reduction in the number of Title VI centers at universities that receive federal funding for Middle East studies and area language studies. And again, this is sort of the start of a potentially new trend or a new reality for the field that it needs to face. But I'm curious to hear your perspectives on to what extent you've seen the impact of declining institutional support. Elizabeth, if you want to begin, and you mentioned the closure of the Saqi bookstore in London back in December after over 40 years. And I read a little bit and sort of saw that the impact of Brexit, for example, had been cited as sort of one of the reasons that brought about the closure of the bookstore. So if you want to talk about that or sort of other effects you've seen in terms of geopolitical shifts on Middle East studies publishing.
Oh no, I'm back to answering first. Yeah, like you said, Jonathan,
Keep switching back and forth.
It's difficult to put your finger, unfortunately, on any one reason, but there are several contributing factors that I'd probably call out. I did cite earlier kind of the closure of the LMEI and how that had impacted our relationship in that sphere. Brexit obviously put a halt to a lot of in-person events or changed the way that we work there. So that's a big factor. Sorry, not Brexit, COVID. Brexit has really increased our production and shipping costs, and also obviously affected which students are now coming to the UK to study. What international students look like now is very different to what international students look like before. And our readers as a demographic have changed as well, as a result of some titles from publishers in North America can now be distributed in the rest of Europe more cheaply than our own editions from the UK. So that's a kind of a bit of a logistical issue. I think in terms of finances, something that we have seen sort of as a trend, and I would love to know if this was the same throughout other territories, is the value that people are willing to put against a book has really declined, the kind of cultural value that we put on a book. And whereas in the past, particularly some of our higher priced volumes, we would be looking to sell a lot more than we are now. So we're really trying to combat that, as all other costs are escalating in the production of books. What people are actually willing to part with has decreased. A lot of that is to do with what subscription models are now available. So whether it's through a kind of open access platform or another kind of online open library internet archive place, what people are willing to part with has really reduced, and the way they see the book as something that is entitled to for free, or whether they should be paying for it, and you can see that manifesting in lots of different ways. So the number of piracy incidents has massively increased. We see a lot more people either uploading content for free or downloading content for free, and it's much more demand on those subscription platforms, which ultimately are not so financially remunerative for a publisher, but we need to put our books there in order to stay relevant, I suppose, and so that students can access them. So it's a very difficult kind of grey area, I think, to navigate at the moment, because on the one hand, of course, we want as many students, particularly, to read and access our books as possible, but we're also sort of being pushed into a space where it's not financially possible as an independent publisher, which we are, to do that. And I would just say, obviously I work for an independent publishing house, so I'm slightly biased, but when we're talking about the Middle East as a region, it's crucial to have publishers who are not financially backed by any one particular party or interest to be publishing these works. We do get approached by numerous bodies, whether they're academic institutions or governments or other, that we have politely declined working with because we don't believe it would give us the integrity to continue to do what we do. So it's a little bit of a difficult line to balance. What we do really appreciate, and is a positive, so I'll focus on that, is when one of our books is course adopted and we come to some sort of understanding with the academics and their students where the book is course adopted. We can usually offer discounts. We can see all that through different copyright patterns, so where our books are photocopied and we get a small small fee or a small permissions fee for those licenses. And that seems a really positive model, and it's useful for us to see. It's great for us to know that sometimes those books are 30 years old and they're still being taught by various universities. So I think it all comes down to communication, and the better the lines of communication are between us and the academics who still find our books interesting and relevant, the better kind of place we can meet at in terms of what extra materials we're able to offer, or if the authors can go in and give a talk, or we can just simply provide copies of those books for free. The problem with things being available online in a streaming platform is often we see very little data, so we really don't know what's going to who, how useful it is, and how it's shaping shared knowledge.
Thank you for that. Yeah, no, that's sounds like a big challenge, and I think as you pointed to, sort of the particular challenge of funding for independent projects and maintaining sort of a degree of independence. I think has been and continues to be one of sort of the key challenges, obviously for publishers, but as well for Middle East study centers, for academics, for think tanks, here in the U.S. I think that's always a concern, and something that at Jadalia and the Arab Studies Institute in general, I think we've been particularly interested in terms of sort of the impact of different funding streams on the question of knowledge production. So I'll pass it over to you, Nadia, to address the same question on if you've seen the impact of declining institutional support for Middle East studies, if perhaps that's actually not a relevant concern, or there's sort of a different context for Middle East studies, from your perspective at AUC in Cairo.
Well, I mean, for a start, we are a Middle East only publisher, so I don't have anything to compare it with. But as far as North America is concerned, I can't honestly say that declining, say, federal support or state support for Middle East studies, I can't see its impact directly on us. But I would say that we have found that the North American academia is quite self-contained. It's self-referential, so it's so vast it doesn't need maybe regional publishers or as much, or academics tend to publish within North America, or especially for younger scholars, supervisors tend to encourage graduate students to publish within North America rather than outside. I'm generalizing hugely. So it doesn't, that's where I'm coming from. So I'm not going to be that affected necessarily by that kind of thing. I think I have found that more of our monographs are published by scholars working out of Europe or the UK. Again, I'm generalizing. Of course, we have scholars from the States or Canada, but I would say more tilted more towards Europe and the United Kingdom. Declining institutional support. I mean, obviously, all academic presses operate to some extent under a subsidy. I know Duke said that they break even without the benefit of subsidy, but we've all felt the declining, like libraries, for example, are spending more and more of their budgets on journals and not on monographs. So that's certainly affected the way we do our business. So we've shifted much more to digital printing, print on demand, much shorter print runs, to get away from the problem of obsolescence and so on, and inventory and unsold stock, all that kind of thing. So I think that's true for a lot of university presses. We are under pressure from our own institution, again, like a lot of university presses, to keep our costs under control. So we are always on the lookout for funding. We don't have, apart from the university subsidy, we don't have a single source of financial help, but we do routinely ask scholars if they have any funding, or organizations like the Barakat Trust. We have a strong art and architecture list. as I said in the printed roundtable, which need a lot of pictures. And that always raises costs. So we always try to find ways of funding those kinds of books. I think obviously we were badly hit in 2011 we had our own COVID before COVID had affected everybody, whereas the Arab uprisings affected us or affected Middle East studies publishers. But we were directly affected because we're based in Tahrir Square, and a good component of our list is dependent on tourist buying. So the tourist market was wiped out, and that led to a decision at the level of the directorship to we decided to shift our publishing efforts towards our selling efforts towards outside Egypt, so not to put all our eggs in the Egyptian basket, as it were. So we also diversified our printing location. So we used to have our own print shop in Egypt. So most of our books were printed in Egypt and then shipped abroad. Now we print in several different locations, and this goes hand in hand with print on demand and digital printing. So you can print smaller ones and print them in the place where you're going to sell the book, as opposed to printing it in Egypt and then shipping it outward to the rest of the world. So the revolutions or the uprisings, the Arab uprisings, particularly the Egyptian revolution, had a huge effect on how we do our business, and that hasn't changed. It was a kind of paradigm shift, and we haven't gone back to our old ways of doing things. We still rely heavily on the Egyptian market. It's very important for our general interest books, to some extent to our fiction in translation, and our Arabic language learning books, and our Egyptology books as well. But for Middle East studies in particular, our market is more North America and Europe. That's where we sell most of our runs, I think.
Okay. Thank you. No, that's fascinating, and I think particularly I think sort of in an undercovered effect of the Arab uprisings and of the uprisings in Egypt in particular, on this question of academic knowledge production, publishing, and sort of the markets that have access to the sort of cutting edge or most recent publications in Middle East studies. And I think you both touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to sort of turn to it more fully now, in terms of the growing shift towards digital production, and if you feel comfortable talking about digital marketing as well, something obviously that has only expanded since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm interested, you both started to talk about this, but the new challenges, but also new possibilities that this shift presents. Elizabeth, let's start with you. And you mentioned obviously the challenge of piracy breaches, which I can only imagine is a huge complication, but also sort of new possibilities in terms of course adoption, other adoptions of text in ebook or audiobook format, or other sort of promising avenues for digital publication.
Yeah, I mean, looking on the flip side, I'm never that disappointed when people are trying to pirate the books or make them available for free, because at least it means people want to read them. The shift towards digital production and marketing has been really helpful. It's fantastic now. We distribute in North America through Ingram's, and there's lots of different marketing possibilities and platforms which they use to enable librarians and academics to be able to look at the early digital copies of the book, and read a little bit in more depth from much further in advance prior to publication than used to be possible. So we have that feedback, and that can also help inform our print numbers and our print runs. nearly all of our books have always been available in ebook anyway, but having more options and opportunities there, whether it's bringing something back in through a print on demand model or through printing through smaller runs through digital scanning rather than a more manual way. It means we can more cheaply produce shorter runs of books. So we're finding our books have a much longer shelf life probably than they would have done 30 years ago. We can always keep those books around. In terms of the marketing, there is a lot of noise to cut through, whether that's because we're competing for other people's time. I think the way that publishers work, which is perhaps different to other people, is that there's no finite number of books that a reader's going to buy, right? And if they're interested in a particular subject area, we're not competing with one another in that area. We want to encourage people to read as many books on that subject as they kind of can. So when we can use AI and use it to quickly generate things like keywords, which increases the SEO of certain titles or draws connections between books to enable people who are interested in a particular area of study to quickly find other books that are relevant to their fields of study. Of course, that's a good thing. Like I mentioned, we're a team of 4 people, so we now are required to use less marketing muscle, but for further gains, I suppose, than we would have done even 2 or 3 years ago. I'm probably speaking a bit of jargon, so I'll just recap a little bit. But if you're buying your books through a platform like Amazon, the way it works for publishers is that we have to we pay to own the space of certain keywords, so that if somebody is going to go on Amazon and type in I don't know, books around views on the Sphinx in the 17th century, for example, we would bid a certain amount of money so that our book about the Sphinx in the 17th century would appear towards the top page of searchability. It can take a long time to kind of manually think about all the linking words that somebody who's searching for an area of research that we're tangentially related to might put in, but AI can generate those very quickly. So we would hope more people can discover our books. And the second way, I suppose, that digital marketing has kind of advanced recently is which we haven't quite yet married up, I don't think, particularly with how we work with academics and institutions, is identifying kind of hotspots when people are likely to be mindful of a book. So publishers traditionally might think of a hotspot as being around publication, because it's when you're likely to get reviews, when people are likely to be talking and sharing information on the book. But the hotspots in the academic calendar year are obviously got nothing to do with the date when a publisher is publishing the book. And journals often have much longer lead-in times to reviews than newspapers and magazines have. So whereas we can identify when people are going to be talking online about a book from traditional mainstream media, it's much harder for us to know when a journal is going to review a book, or even when an academic is thinking about what books they're going to be adopting for a course or teaching on for the next semester. If we were able to know when those times are, then again, we could kind of amplify, I suppose, the digital marketing that happens to make sure our books were more visible or more affordable, perhaps, in those windows. But that's something we haven't quite figured out yet. So if anybody has any advice on that, I'm all ears.
Thank you. I think everyone's sort of figuring out the potentials and dangers of AI technology at the moment. Nadia, I'll pass this question over to you.
Well, in terms of digital production, I think I already mentioned, I agree with what Elizabeth says about shorter print runs. Digital printing allows us to take less. I mean, publishing is an inherently risky business by definition, and I think COVID just brought that home even more. It emphasized that to everybody because there were so many uncertainties and bookshops being shuttered and everything. So COVID just accelerated processes that were already in place. It didn't. I don't think it did introduce certain new things, but the move towards digital printing, especially for academic publishers, I think was already there. And it also allows us to, revive backlist titles, and books that were dead come alive again. Books that are put out of print can be printed again. And the benefits are clear, that we can print in several different territories at the same time, and hit the market running, hit the ground running. So we're, immediately, we don't have to ship out of North America to Egypt or ship out of Egypt to the UK, that kind of thing. And that makes a big difference from a marketing point of view. I think in terms of marketing, I mean, we I feel that now when people talk about marketing, they mostly mean digital marketing. It's not that the traditional ways of marketing, newspapers, television, at least for trade books, are no longer effective. It's just that you're competing with so many other books. It's very difficult to get a review in the New York Times, or a slot on a morning show or something like that. So instead of one event, instead of a book launch happening when the book is published, you start sending out galley proofs to publishers before the book is published. This is for trade books, not academic books. And then you have lots of tiny little things that you keep doing for that book. I think there's much more onus on the author now, and this applies also to academic books. We actually see a difference when an author is very proactive. Not necessarily just in terms of digital marketing, also lecture tours. We can see the difference when an author is very proactive and goes from town to town or university to university talking about the books. It does make a difference. But for us, being based in Cairo, digital marketing has been a boon, in the sense, and I think many publishers probably feel this way, is that we now Zoom talks are the norm. So you can bring together people from just like as we're doing now, you can bring people from very different locations together to speak, to talk about a book. Yes, you are competing probably with lots of other book talks which are taking place at the same time or in the same time span, but still, it's for us, we love that. We love the fact that we can bring an author in the United States to talk about a certain book, and to create a community in a certain moment to talk about something that's just been published. Timing is important, I think, for academic books as well. We do try to get reviews going right away as soon as a book is published. We've had reviewers tell us that if a book has been out for a year, then it's a bit harder to get reviewers to write about the book. But yes, reviews for academic books do take a long time to come out. You can wait a couple of years. You have to wait a couple of years or something for a book to be reviewed. But yeah, no, digital marketing, social media for us is very, very important. And there is a lot of collaboration. We try to coach authors to help them. I suppose the downside is that if you're a shy, retiring type, if you're the kind of author many academics shy away from self-promotion and they find it cringy and embarrassing. Well, yeah, but you have to do it. We need you to do it. And we do rely, especially on academic authors, obviously, to tell us, who we should approach for reviews, and who the audience is, who the readership is. That's very important. Trade books are much harder to market, in the sense that there are more unknowns, and it takes more creativity and effort to market trade books. Academic books, you could say that their marketing is a bit more formulaic, but in both cases, a proactive author is really very important. So we try to help our shyer authors to put themselves out there, unfortunately for them, and kind of self-promote on their own, if they have a website or social media space or podcast. New Books Network is great. That we try to encourage. We try to get our authors to talk about their books on there. So yeah, I think digital marketing it does present a lot of opportunities, but yeah, there's a lot of noise as well, and you have to be really focused and targeted, and to think about how you go about promoting your books in that way.
Thank you, Nadia. No, that's important, and I think also take this opportunity to promote another project that we have at MESPI and Editorial, which is Newton new texts out now.
Yes.
That where we work directly with authors, to try and what I think can be sort of a less intimidating way to allow them to promote their books and to sort of give people an insight into their books in a way that's not sort of a traditional review. And I'm cognizant of time. We only have about 10 minutes left, so I think we have time for one more question. This has been incredibly rich, and again, thank you both for being here. I want to, perhaps end by circling back to our earlier discussion about, the academic market and academic publishing in Middle East studies, and perhaps how you think publications in Middle East studies, including both nonfiction but also fiction and translation, how can these publications better reach non-academic audiences? And Nadia, let's start with you. And I know, particularly as you mentioned, with the sort of post-2011 shift away from the Egyptian market towards, Europe and North America, this might be sort of an increasing challenge. But if there are sort of any strategies that you and AUC Press have found effective, again, whether that's new possibilities in digital marketing or ebook and audiobook availability, but sort of moving past the academic market for Middle East studies publications.
Well, I mean, you mentioned audiobooks. I think audiobooks are definitely, there's been a big growth in audiobook publishing. It's just another format. I mean, like ebook or hardcover or print. It does draw attention to the print edition. It is another way of pushing the book. And we have AUC Press. I mean, only for our fiction in translation, but we do try to publish audiobooks when our fiction comes out, and it is a way of widening the market. With North America, I mean, we the books. The books that do really well for us, I think, in North America at the general interest level, include fiction and Egyptology mostly. With the Middle East studies, we're more focused on monographs, and I think there is space definitely for more general interest books on Middle East studies. But at the moment, we're more in the monograph area than general interest. But we do very, very well with Egyptology books aimed not necessarily at the kind of mass market level, but at the hobbyist level. So people who are not trained Egyptologists, but they're passionate about Egyptology. There's a very good market for that in the States. And our fiction does well, especially for if there are course adoptions. We do have to work very hard to push our fiction in general, because part of the issue with fiction in translation is that many of the authors don't speak English. And for many readers, the translator can certainly do a lot to push fiction, but it's the author they really want to know about it. They're the content creator. They're the magician or the celebrity. So with the fiction, we rely heavily on the author's efforts. And we do our best to have video events or book readings in bookstores in the States, wherever the author is prepared to go, if they can go there. But often we end up relying on the translator to kind of help push the fiction. But in Egypt, we kind of have a captive market because we do a lot of guidebooks, general interest books, and if they are general interest books about Egypt, we have, for example, two very successful books on urban Egypt by David Sims, Understanding Cairo, The Logic of a City Out of Control, and Egypt's the Desert Dreams, which is about the desert cities. Now, those David is a brilliant writer, but he's not an academic, and those books have done extremely well for us in Egypt. Understanding Cairo has done really well for us worldwide, and I think that's largely down to content. I mean, David is an excellent writer, and he writes in a way that is very accessible, even if his work is undergirded by scholarship, a lot of research. But because he writes in a way which anyone can understand, that then that means that those books have legs. They really go far, but especially in Egypt because it's a very Egypt centric subject. So I think for getting the book out, I mean, yeah, it has to be a combination, obviously, of content and marketing. But yeah, the marketing in the States and Europe for fiction and general interest titles it needs a lot of work, I would say.
Thank you. Then Elizabeth, I'll give you the closing word, and maybe if you can sort of also talk about this in the context of again the closure of the Saqi bookshop, and if you all have sort of started to pivot or adopt new strategies to reach perhaps the audiences that formerly could just wander into the shop and now might have to be reached in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. All that any publisher is ever really trying to do, I think, and booksellers as well, is to try and build the word of mouth effect. Nothing sells books like the word of mouth effect, whether it's peers talking to you about a book, or professors talking to students about a book. That's always what you're trying to replicate. And I think one of the challenges that we're now becoming customized to is working out what does word of mouth look like in a kind of post-COVID landscape where literally none of us were able to talk to one another. And with the closures or decreasing numbers of bookshops in the UK, working out what that word of mouth effect is a little bit harder. I think it's quite apparent, certainly to us anyway, that when you work in the industry, you get these quite rigid ideas of the spaces that you see the books and the kind of people who you see picking up and reading the books. And often that doesn't actually translate into what the reality is. So the important thing is to put your books where people feel that the book is for them. So we have quite a few books that we would consider to be academic crossover books, but which have really done very well in the trade. And that's absolutely because we've put them in very trade spaces with a very clear angle that makes people who have a general interest in them think, oh, this is for me. I'm not going to feel ignorant for reading something that I don't know much around. So an example of a traditional event where we've done that is we publish a book called Classical Poems by Arab Women, which is exactly what it says on the tin. It covers poetry by women over a period of 5,000 years, and it's bilingual. So the book's in both English and Arabic, which traditionally most people might think would be off-putting in the trade. But for Valentine's Day a few years ago, we did a bilingual poetry evening, which we really marketed as female love and lust, and 500 people had to go on the waiting list for that event because we'd market it in a way that it was very much so for people who spoke one language or the other, but who wanted to come along and do something very different. And it was a really interesting report that came out a few weeks ago that says almost half of people who read literature in translation are under the age of 25. So it was no surprise that most of the people who came to that bilingual event were under the age of 25. And obviously the book did really well as a result. Most people who came along then wanted to buy the book because they had a good time, and they spoke to other people who had a good time, and it felt quite culty. And you can do the same thing online as well. So we work with lots of Instagrammers and YouTubers who, again, are speaking to what we might think of as lay readers, but they're people who are, when they feel included in the conversation, will want to buy the book. So another example of that is we publish a book called Believing Women in Islam by Asma Barlas, which has been around for many years, and again has been kind of course adopted and is traditionally seen in a university space. But there were several Instagram channels that we did promotions with, which again really changed the audience of that book. We offered a discount coupon for people who followed those Instagram channels, so people could buy directly from us for half price. So they were buying it at a trade book price, not at its RRP, which is the higher price point. And those did really well. We did something similar with the colour photography book. Sorry, we've got an aeroplane landing somewhere in the background. I don't know if that's me or Jonathan or Nadia, but never mind.
A little bit.
Called Asian Britain by Suchila Nasta, and there's an Instagram account called Brown History, and they shared a lot of the images from the book to raise awareness of the post-colonial situation or the colonial legacy between India and Britain. And again, that book did really, really well amongst not the readers that, when you look at the BIC or the BISAC codes or the shelves that it's shelved in a library or a bookshop, that those aren't the places that our readers always go to, even though we think they are. So yeah, there's loads of opportunities there about building the word of mouth effect. And I would just sort of close, I suppose, by saying we only publish 15 books each year. So our publishing model is very much so that all of those books need to do their thing. They all need to break even, at least. They all need to be successful in whatever area they're operating. So we put a lot of time and energy into identifying who the readership is from the moment that we sign the book, and build, if you like, a kind of core support group for that book, and build partnerships for that book, whether that's charities, NGOs, endorsers, just individuals who have some kind of cultural clout in that sphere, and really grow momentum from there up. And that's not always easy because we publish on such a wide number of subjects. So sometimes it might be 3 or 4 years before we contact a group with another book that we think they might be interested in. But kind of perversely, I suppose, my kind of closing conclusion is that it's all about trying to recreate a word of mouth feel in a digital space, and that's kind of done a really lovely 360 in terms of today that does often look like audiobook exposure and podcast exposure. So we are literally going back to a word of mouth that's just through an intermediary, and that does travel across seas in a really beautiful way. So we can have those conversations internationally at the same time, which we never used to have. So ending on a positive note, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, and it's particularly I love the statistic you shared that about younger readers sort of driving the market for fiction and translation. I think that's always, particularly I think from our perspective in the U.S., that's always been a gap, and it's nice to know that might be changing going forward. So thank you again. Thank you both so much for participating in this roundtable. It's been an incredibly fruitful discussion. I know that our audience, has enjoyed it, and those that can now go back and watch the broadcast on Editorial YouTube will appreciate it. And again, this will be the first installment in our live roundtable series, so keep an eye out for future editions. And again, we've published this sort of written roundtable format with Elizabeth and Nadia and a couple other publishers participating in that, which is available up on Editorial. So thank you both again for being here. It's been a great experience.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.